From the outside looking in, the Watts family seemed like the picture of the American dream. Chris, tall, quiet, and steady, worked in the oil industry. Shanann, his beautiful, vibrant wife, ran a successful online business and was a devoted mother. Their two little girls, Bella and Celeste, ages 4 and 3, were often seen in cheerful Facebook videos, smiling brightly as they hugged their parents in their spacious Colorado home. Shanann frequently posted pictures and videos of their family online. Birthday celebrations, sweet moments of Chris playing with the girls, loving words she shared about her husband. Everything painted a portrait of a perfect home. She called Chris the man of my life. In one touching video, Shanann surprised him with the news of her 3rd pregnancy. Chris smiled in disbelief, pulling her into a joyful hug that felt like pure happiness. But behind that polished surface, cracks had already begun to show. Chris had grown distant and withdrawn. Shanann sensed the shift. Missed calls, short replies, averted eyes. The man who once knelt to propose in front of a crowd now sat in silence, avoiding the growing fears in his wife's eyes. Shanann confided in her close friend that she suspected Chris was having an affair. She even documented her pain in her journal, writing with heartbreaking clarity, "I feel myself slipping away from him." Still, she clung to hope. She believed things would get better once their baby arrived. She named the unborn child Nico, a small wish for a new beginning. No one could have predicted that the so-called perfect family would, just weeks later, be at the center of a horrific tragedy that shook the entire nation. While Shanann was trying to hold her family together, Chris was slipping into another world, a world of lies, secret messages, and an affair fueled by lust. He had met Nickel Kessinger, a co-worker at Anadarko Petroleum where he worked. Nickel was young, single, and quickly drawn to Chris's calm and courteous demeanor. Chris told her he was separated, that his marriage was cold and lifeless, that his wife was controlling, and he was just waiting for the right time to file for divorce. Nickel believed him, or wanted to believe him. In the brief time that followed, they dove headfirst into a whirlwind of passion, sneaking around, going on secret outings, exchanging flirty photos and steamy texts that would later become chilling evidence. Meanwhile, Shanann, pregnant and exhausted, had taken the girls to visit her parents in North Carolina. She called and texted Chris constantly, but was met with cold indifference. No more "I love you," no more bedtime video calls for the kids. Shanann knew something was wrong. In her final messages, she pleaded gently, trying to bring him back. "I miss you, the girls miss you. We're still a family, aren't we?" But Chris's mind was already elsewhere. He was living in a fantasy of a new life, without Shanann, without the children, without the weight of responsibility. A life where he could start over, free, with his younger lover. The day Shanann returned from North Carolina was the day Chris put his deadly plan into motion. In his eyes, they were no longer his wife and daughters, they were obstacles. And to have his future, he was willing to trade everything. In blood. In the early hours of August 13th, 2018, Shanann returned home on a late flight from Arizona. Exhausted after a business trip, she quietly entered the bedroom, where Chris was waiting. The doorbell camera captured the final image of Shanann alive, stepping through the front door. No one knew it would be the last time she was seen. Inside the bedroom, a tense confrontation unfolded. Shanann confronted Chris. She knew something was wrong, knew he had changed, knew there was someone else, but she never expected his response to be ice-cold and deadly. Chris was no longer the man she once loved. In a brief, fateful moment, he lunged at her, wrapping his hands around her neck, right there, in the room where they had once shared so many happy memories. Shanann fought back, but she was pregnant, weaker, and in the end, she collapsed. Forever. The house fell into an eerie silence, but the nightmare was far from over. Bella and Celeste, their two daughters, woke up. They walked into the room, confused. "Where's Mommy?" they asked. Chris told them Mommy was sick. He wrapped Shanann's body in a blanket and carried her to his truck. The two little girls, unaware of what was happening, sat quietly in the back seat. And just like that, the three of them, the father, his two young daughters, and the lifeless body of their mother, left the home that had once been filled with laughter. The drive to the oil site took over an hour. No one spoke. Bella sat silently, watching her father. Maybe she sensed something no child should ever have to feel, but couldn't find the words to say. When they arrived at the oil field where Chris worked, he dragged Shanann's body from the truck and buried her in a shallow grave. Then he returned and turned on his own daughters. Celeste was killed first, without a word, without a plea. But when it was Bella's turn, she cried, begged, "Daddy, no." Those were her last words. Chris forced their tiny bodies into crude oil tanks, cold, tight, filthy, as if they hadn't been his own flesh and blood. Then he drove home, wiped the sweat from his brow, changed his clothes, stood before a mirror, straightened his appearance, and stepped into the role he had prepared to play. The grieving husband, the heartbroken father, who had just lost his wife and children. After murdering his wife and children, Chris began cleaning up the scene. He returned to the house as if nothing had happened. Carefully, he washed the bed sheets, mopped the floors, and erased every trace. The man who had just taken 3 lives made coffee, ate breakfast, and went to work. Just another normal day. At the crime scene, a remote oil field in the middle of nowhere, Shanann's body was hastily buried in a shallow grave. Bella and Celeste, the 2 little angels, were stuffed into separate oil tanks, each 7 meters tall with an opening just 40 centimeters wide. The tanks were a few meters apart, and Chris had climbed up each one, opened the hatch, and dropped their tiny bodies inside. Later, when investigators opened the tanks, many broke down in tears. Inside the thick, toxic, crude oil, under extreme heat and harsh chemicals, the girls' bodies had deteriorated badly. Chris's cruelty wasn't just in the act of killing them, but in how he discarded them, like industrial waste. Back home, Chris began pretending nothing had happened. He called Shanann's phone, pretending to be worried. He texted her as if she were still alive. "Where are you?" "I'm so worried." He even asked neighbors to check their security cameras and told police Shanann may have left the house with the girls. He tried to stage it as a disappearance, a runaway mother. But things didn't go as smoothly as he had hoped. One of Shanann's close friends, Nicole, noticed something was off. Shanann hadn't returned her texts or calls. Nicole immediately contacted the police. That same afternoon, officers arrived at Chris's house. In body cam footage, later released to the public, viewers saw a man disturbingly calm, repeating one phrase over and over, "I don't know where my wife and kids are." But there were things Chris couldn't hide. Suspicious glances from neighbors, surveillance footage, GPS data from his truck that tracked his early morning route. Beneath the mask of a grieving husband was a murderer, clinging desperately to his final disguise. When police arrived at the Watts home, Chris maintained a calm, collected face. He led officers around the house, pointing to empty rooms and insisting that Shanann had left with their 2 daughters. But something felt off. The uneasy glances from neighbors, Chris's anxious body language, and most notably, his truck. A neighbor, after reviewing footage from his home security camera, pointed out something strange. Chris's truck had left the driveway around 5 a.m., a time when Shanann was supposedly still at home. The video showed Chris quietly loading something into the truck, walking back and forth, and then driving away alone. No one else appeared in the frame. That was the moment police began to seriously suspect him. They invited Chris to the station for further questioning. He agreed. In the interrogation room, Chris continued to lie, calmly, confidently, as if he had nothing to hide. What he didn't know was that investigators were already several steps ahead. They had a plan, a polygraph test. On August 15th, Chris voluntarily took the test. The result? He failed, completely. With nowhere left to turn, Chris began to unravel. He didn't confess right away. Instead, he told one final, cruel lie, blaming Shanann. He claimed he had seen her kill the girls after an argument, and in a fit of rage, he killed her. It was a desperate attempt to save himself by tarnishing the woman he had murdered. But the investigators didn't buy it. Physical evidence, tiny traces of blood, GPS data from his truck, surveillance footage, and most damning of all, his inconsistent statements, had already boxed him in. Even without a full confession, they had more than enough to charge him. Later, during a private conversation with his father, Chris finally broke down. He admitted the truth. He had killed his wife and both daughters. From a model father in the eyes of the community, Chris Watts became a symbol of betrayal, a monster hiding behind a smile. The entire nation was in shock. People couldn't comprehend it. How could a father do something so horrific to his own flesh and blood? That question still haunts America to this day, and it may never have a satisfying answer. When the identity of Chris Watts' mistress was revealed, the name Nicole Kessinger quickly became the focus of national attention. The woman who had once naively believed in a tale of a failing marriage was now seen as the other woman in the public eye. And to millions, the spark that ignited one of the most horrific crimes of the century. Nicole had worked at the same company as Chris. She claimed she had no idea Shanann was pregnant, no idea that Chris was still living with his wife and children. To Nicole, Chris was a man suffering through a broken marriage, trying to leave the past behind and start fresh. They dated in secret, texted late into the night, and even talked about building a future, one without a wife, without kids. But when Shanann went missing, everything collapsed. Nicole, upon seeing the news in the media, immediately contacted the police. She cooperated fully, turning over messages, phone records, hoping to prove her innocence. But the public was unforgiving. Hundreds of thousands of messages flooded her social media, hate mail, death threats, online mobs digging through her personal life. Her photos were spread across the internet, her private information exposed. She was branded a murderer by association, the woman who caused 3 innocent deaths. The vitriol came not just from strangers, but from media outlets eager to feed an audience hungry for drama, eager to find someone to blame. Nicole was forced to leave her home, change her name, and disappear from public view. She vanished from all social platforms, quit her job, and slipped into anonymity. She became a ghost in her own life, convicted by the court of public opinion, even though no legal court ever charged her with a crime. Maybe Nicole truly didn't know the truth. Maybe she was just a pawn in Chris's deadly plan. But one thing is certain, she loved the wrong man, and the price for that blind love was a life that would never be the same again. On November 19, 2018, in a Weld County courtroom, Chris Watts hung his head as the judge read his sentence. 5 life terms without the possibility of parole, along with numerous additional charges for murder, unlawful disposal of bodies, and lying to investigators. He didn't ask for leniency, he didn't appeal. He simply bowed his head, shedding no tears, as if, in his mind, it had all ended long before. Behind him, Shanann's family wept. Her father, Frank Ruchek, couldn't hold back tears as he spoke of his granddaughters and the unborn grandson who never got the chance to live. Shanann's mother trembled as she described dreaming of her daughter, crying in the night. "God may forgive you," she said through sobs, "but I never will." Chris was transferred to a maximum security prison in Wisconsin, where he now lives in near total isolation, kept away from other inmates for his own safety. He eats alone, sleeps alone, and spends his days in solitary confinement. Occasionally, he writes letters to his parents filled with vague expressions of remorse. "The devil took control of me." But never once did he write to Shanann. No letters for Bella, no apology to Celeste. Outside the prison walls, the home that was once their family's haven was left abandoned, eventually sold at auction. The internet once celebrated the Watts as the perfect family. Now their name is remembered for just one word: massacre. Shanann's family created a charity in her name to support victims of domestic violence. They didn't want her remembered as just another name in a crime file. They wanted the world to remember her and her children as people who lived, who loved, who brought light to others. But for many, the wound left by this tragedy will never fully heal. Not just because of the horror of the crime, but because it came from the person who once said, "I'll protect you for the rest of my life." That promise, in the end, became a curse,